Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of A Happy Moment. My name is Dan, and I'm glad to have you with me today. Today, I will be chatting with a very special guest. His name is Guy Morris, and to say that Guy has accomplished a lot in his life, I think would be an understatement. Everything from being an author to a songwriter to being a technological innovator. And with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and let Guy do some talking here. So, Guy, welcome to the show.
Hi, Dan. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Glad to have you here. As I touched on, you've accomplished quite a bit in your life. If we could just take it back to your earlier years and ask you, what kind of goals or aspirations did you have when you were younger?
When I wanted to basically sail on a boat around the world, but for a good part of my childhood was pretty traumatized. So I was really looking to survive. I was a homeless runaway at the age of 13. I had to survive. I worked with migrant workers in ranches around Southern California. And so my younger years really revolved around, I think, survival to a great extent. But when I did allow myself to dream, it really fell into two primary categories. One was travel, and the other one was music. I was enamored, like most kids, 10-year-olds at the time, I was enamored with the Beatles. And so that really that gave me an expression that gave me the idea that a poor kid like me could find some sort of success in the world. Once I left home with a GED at age 50, I just got the worst jobs imaginable because that's all you can get with a GED. And by the time I was 19, I had already gotten married, which was way, way too young. And I should have realized that at the time, but I was too messed up to do that. I became aware of my responsibilities, that I had to not just be able to feed myself and I could live any kind of way on the street, but I actually had to take care of somebody else. And the idea of actually being a provider started to weigh in on me. And so when I got the opportunity, even though I was functionally illiterate and 18 units below minimum requirements to go to college, I took the chance because it was probably my one and only chance to change my stars. And so I not only took the chance, but I was determined to not hold back anything in terms of making it successful for me. And so I probably slept about an average of about 4 hours a night for several years, working part-time, taking care of my wife. She was anorexic. I had to take care of the baby. And then I was taking somewhere between 22 and 24 units of credits each semester. I ultimately graduated with multiple degrees. I was on the dean's list. I was given a full scholarship to go to college, and I was accepted separately to go to the Harvard MBA program. I couldn't afford that, which was one of my big regrets in life. Most of that, all of that good fortune was based on, and I was offered a job at IBM. And all of that was based on the fact that I had built a macroeconomic forecast model that had outperformed the Federal Reserve and pretty much changed an aspect of how we create economic models to this very day. And so I went from within a few short years of being told my entire life that I was stupid and worthless to actually realizing that maybe that wasn't true.
What did you use as inspiration or motivation to keep going forward?
My daughter was a big one. Having a toddler and realizing that she didn't know or care what my childhood was like. I owed her a decent one. That was a big one. And the fact that I had already lived that life. I couldn't imagine ever wanting to go back. This was my do or die moment. I had no other choice. If I didn't get an education, I wasn't going to ever be able to really make anything of myself. And there was that sense of this is that pivot point you get in your life. And sometimes you get those where it may be tough, it may be hard, it may seem impossible, but if you don't make the effort to try, you're always going to regret it. Failure, if you failed and you gave it everything you got, that's depressing. But if you failed because you didn't try at all, that's sad. So I that was my only choice. I had already lived on the street. I could not go back to that.
I mentioned that you are an author and a songwriter. Would you say that you've always had that sort of creative spark, or did that come along later in life?
I think I've always had it to some extent. I spent a lot of time alone as a kid because of my situation, and so I think I had to learn how to entertain myself to some extent. While I was living on the street, I hitchhiked to Tijuana and bought a little tiny, cheap, almost a toy guitar in a cardboard box and started teaching myself on how to play and tried to write songs when I was in high school, and it was always a creative outlet for me. I was inspired by men like, the Beatles and Simon and Garfunkel and Bob Dylan and Crosby, Stills and Nash and others who were able to write songs that spoke to me. I mean, Homeward Bound, The Boxer, there were a number of Paul Simon songs that as a street kid really spoke to my heart. And so there was a part of me that wanted to emulate that. But when I went to college and I had to start learning how to take a real job, I actually just put the guitar down and didn't play for several years. It wasn't until after my divorce when I had to start trying to rediscover myself again, when I started playing again. And a friend of mine at the time, I was living in LA at the time and working in Westwood, and I was living on a 50-foot sailing yacht in Marina del Rey. And I had been starting to practice more and play more and get since my divorce. And so I was really getting pretty good again. And a friend of mine asked me, he wanted to produce a kids album and asked me if I'd write a few songs for him. So I did. He demoed the songs and I never really thought much of it. Several months later, I got a call from Disney Records. Apparently, to make a long story, at first I thought it was a gag. And they kept saying, we're listening to your tape. And I said, I never sent you a tape. They said, no, this is Disney, so-and-so from Disney Records. We're listening to your tape right now. I almost blew the deal. But apparently he finally named the songs. I said, well, tell me the songs that you're listening to. And he named the songs. I know who sent you the tape. So I did some contract songwriting for Disney for a while. And it was an interesting experience because whereas I would always, for my own self, want to take as much time as possible to really craft a song. Every single word had to matter. I was really trying to write about my own experience and use it as a way of venting all of the traumas and things I'd experienced in life. With Disney, you had a week to write 5 songs, and they would send you a theme sheet, and you basically could either bang them out or you couldn't. So it was a really interesting process for me to learn how to go from the two different styles of writing. But I did pretty good. I landed songs on a few projects. They didn't pay extremely well. They were difficult to work with at times, but it was an interesting experience. I haven't been doing a lot of music the last few years since I retired. For a while, I had a recording studio in my home when I worked with Microsoft, and it was a really great vent for me, venting process to go from technical and analytical and business and PowerPoints and spreadsheets and policy statements and project plans and product plans all day to just spend a few hours at night doing something creative to just balance out my brain so I could rest and sleep. When I retired and I decided that I wanted to become an author because I felt like I had some interesting stories to say and some things I felt strongly about that I want to talk about, like I do with a lot of things, I kind of dive in with both feet and I immerse myself. And so last night, I'm working on I just started the 3rd draft of my 4th book. And I typically work to 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And so I'll just put everything 6-7 days a week. That's what I'm obsessing over. That's what I'm immersed in. Those characters, the plots, the research, and my books require a research. And so I'm always immersed in those worlds. And so I haven't really spent a lot of time doing a lot of music. At my age, I don't really have a lot of venues where I could go present and perform and get feedback on the music. And to me, that's a big part of the creative process is that feedback. And so I'm getting that a lot more through my books at this point. So it's been an evolutionary process. I think writing a 3-minute story where you've got two verses and a chorus to basically get people hooked into a narrative, whether that narrative is a love story or a protest song or an experience or a dance experience or whatever that is. You've got a very concise, two paragraphs, five lines each with maybe a few lines in the chorus to paint your picture. And learning how to then take that and expand that into a 350, 400 page award-winning thriller with multiple characters and points of view and action points and things that are really going on in the world to think about has really allowed me to take that creative experience and almost pump it with steroids in a sense, right?
So at one point in your life did you decide that you wanted to start writing books?
I had an experience when I was really young where I went to see the movie Swiss Family Robinson, and I thought I could write a book similar to that because I was so excited about, treasures and hunts and tree houses, and it was all fun. After my divorce, I was a single parent. So while I was living on a boat and I was living by myself, I had my son, and I was raising my son. And so I didn't have a lot of money. I couldn't really go on much of a dating life for several years. I didn't really want to be spending a lot of money on babysitters every night. And so I had a lot of time on my hands, and I'm not really a big TV watcher. I tend to want to create or research or learn. But I had access to a lot of computers. And so he was a voracious reader. And so I wrote him a short story called Paolo and the Shark, just to see if I could write a book. Now, wasn't that big of a book. It was only 100 or so pages. It was targeted towards an 11 or 12-year-old. Of course, it had, pirates and treasure and ghosts and, mythology, and had all these cool things that any 10, 11, 12-year-old boy would want. And he loved it. And he wanted, his cousins read it and their friends read it. And I didn't think much of it. A couple of years later, I went to write him a sequel to it. But this time I wanted the premise of the story to be based on something factual and real. I wanted to use it as not just a way of entertaining, but I wanted to use it as a way of teaching history in a sense. So I started doing research, and I stumbled upon a true historical mystery that took me 12 years to research the history, the archaeology, the Mayan mythology, and other aspects of the story. By that point, he was grown and gone. And so I started redrafting it as more of an adult novel as opposed to a children's novel. And as I kept researching, and of course I still had a job, so I was working 70, 80 hour plus a week. So this was more of the kind of thing when I wasn't working in my studio or before I had the studio, I would churn on the story aspects of this before I would fall asleep for a few hours doing the research. And so the story kept evolving. The more research I did, the more I understood what was really going on. And the story that got me hooked was that in 1672, Henry Morgan took 36 ships and 2,000 men to raid the city of Panama, richest city in the whole New World. All of the gold from the Inca Empire stored in Panama. All of the gems and resources from Ecuador and Colombia stored in Panama. Gold, silver, spices, foodstuffs from Mexico stored in Panama. Silks, tusks, statues, bronzes, Ming Dynasty vases from the Orient stored in Panama. Well, instead of waiting for them to put it on ships, and so the Spanish was on the Pacific side, they would do armed mule trains over to Portobello, where they would then load them into ships and take them to first Cuba, then Spain. Morgan didn't want to wait for the ships. He wanted to basically go rob the bank in a sense. Well, he lost half of his men on the journey to Panama. The city burned down in a single day, but he conquered the city and was there for 4 months, torturing people on all their hidden stash. He came back with 35 tons of plunder, probably close to $1 billion to $1.5 billion. But when he reached his fleet on the Caribbean side of the isthmus, he cheated all of his men, disappeared with everything, including 600 slaves on 3 ships, none of it ever seen again. But Morgan survived and was ultimately sent to England because he had broken a peace treaty with Spain during the raid. They thought he was a hero, so they knighted him as Sir Henry Morgan. They sent him back to Jamaica with a garrison of soldiers as a lieutenant governor. But instead of going back for his $1 billion plunder, he went into this haunted, drunken, depressed debauchery and burned his logbook so the world would never know why he was abandoning $1 billion. 3 years after he died, the whole city of Port Royal sank into the ocean in an earthquake tsunami, including his grave, and many of the locals of the time said they had been cursed by Morgan. Now, all of that is true. I was fascinated. I wanted to find out first what happened to 30 tons of plunder, 3 ships, and 600 souls. Somebody had to have found something by now, and in fact, somebody did. And then 2, I wanted to know what happened to Morgan. What was so traumatic that could change a bloodthirsty, greedy, amoral, vicious, strategic, did I say greedy, man like Morgan to give up $1 billion plunder and then wuss out about it and burn his logbooks? That was the real mystery. And it took me 12 years to connect events from his insanity through events through the Inquisition that led all the way back to the origins of the Mayan creation myth. So that became what started as a secondary book for my son, became my first major book as an adult, called The Curse of Cortes. That book was listed by BookTrib, which is part of Barnes & Noble, as one of their favorite 25 books of 2021. They called it Indiana Jones meets Da Vinci Code. Now, that's cool, but I like Indiana Jones meets The Goonies for grown-ups, sprinkled with Stephen King.
Now, this is a pretty fascinating story. Do you have any guesses on why Morgan did what he did?
Oh yeah, that's in the book. I
Okay.
developed theories. I had to go investigate the theories to see if there was any evidence. I tried to. It was a series of me trying to connect the next dot, and it was I had made several trips to the region, did on a couple of dives, went exploring some Mayan ruins. I even had a cartel thug during the process break into my condo, and when I came back and confronted him, he threatened to kill me if I messed with him. So after I messed with him in Cancun to get him out of my condo, I put him in the book. I made him one of the bad guys. I messed with him again. I figured I'd get my twofer out of life.
So,
Shea Golan in the book is my twofer. Yeah, it was a fascinating story. I loved it. It took me years to really figure out how to take all of this amazing history, connected history that I discovered, and put it into a fast-paced tale that would keep you turning the pages almost by themselves, really engage you in some humanity and great characters, but keep you excited about what the possibilities and theories were around what happened and why.
the book is called Curse of
Curse of
Cortes.
Cortes.
Who's Cortes?
Cortes is actually the name in the story of a Inquisition executioner who went missing in fiction. That's true. In my story, he marooned and went insane and wrote a logbook. And what was interesting about Cortes was that that was his middle name, and he liked to go by it because of the fame and renown of Hernan Cortes. But he was actually the half-breed son of a half-breed brother to the governor of Guatemala, Pedro de Alvareras. And so Diego de Alvareras died in Peru. And when he died, they took his half-breed son and they sent him to the monastery at Manu, which was run by the Franciscans, where they were given just enough education where they were good servants, but they were really still half-breeds with no real rights. Now, the Inquisition in Yucatan began when 2 youths from that monastery, no names were ever used in the history book, the history books that I ever read, but there were 2 youths at that monastery who discovered by accident a cave in the nearby hills where a few hundred Mayan relics and artifacts were found because the Mayans didn't want to give up their old religion. They were being forced to. Well, that sparked the Inquisition in the Yucatan, where thousands of people were tortured, hundreds of people died, tens of thousands of Mayan codexes were burned, Mayan idols and relics were basically destroyed. And when they would do these horrific tortures and executions, the priests were too holy to do it themselves. They would conscript the masitos, the half-breed boys from the monastery, to do their dirty work. And so I took that history and I embodied it into this one boy that I knew about. And he became he was one of the boys who discovered the hidden relics. And he would then become one of their worst executioners. And that would drive him into a place of insanity.
Now, what kind of research did you do for this novel in regards to curses, and what did you find out about that?
Well, there's a lot of elements about curses that are psychological, right? That if somebody thinks they're cursed, they're going to act in such a way that they're going to interpret things or create things around them. And in this sense, I wanted to use the curse as a vehicle to basically start driving the characters to act in a way that they would normally not do so if they were not trying to resolve this sense that they were cursed, and that the riddle written by Cortes was a key to understanding it or undoing it. And so it would lead them to go find where all this treasure was actually stored, to discover a number of different things, and that'll lead them into historic layers of history. But it really was, in some senses, a vehicle that I could use in order to promote actions on the part of the main character, whose name is Sophia. She's an orphan, was orphaned as a child. Both of her family has been under this stigma that they were cursed for hundreds of years. She doesn't believe in superstitions. She doesn't want to believe in this stuff. She just wants to clear her name. But everything keeps going wrong. And when she discovers some ancient artifacts, including the logbook of Cortes, hidden under the family home, she basically tries to investigate what these things are. And in doing so, it just unravels a sequence of events that threaten her life and the life of everyone around her. And so in order to basically resolve this, she has to move. It's one of those things where in order to resolve it, you have to move through it. And so it's a way of drawing the characters through this ordeal that allows them to unravel all these layers of history.
How does this relate to like mythology, Mayan creation myths? You had mentioned in one of the blurbs for the book, there's a Mayan prophet, Shalom Balaam, that was involved. I probably butchered the pronunciation of that, but
that's pretty good, actually. That took me a while to kind of connect. The island where I believe that this took place. Now, first off, I said that somebody had to find something of this story, of this treasure by now, even though maybe they didn't know where it came from or how it came to be, but they must have found something. And in 1911, a British explorer, quote unquote, treasure hunter named F.A. Mitchell Hedges was digging on one of the smaller island cays of the Bay Islands off of Honduras called Roatan. And he dug there for several years, and he dug up several thousand artifacts, mainly broken pottery shards and things of that nature. But he claimed at one point that he had found Atlantis, which everyone thought was ridiculous. They laughed him to scorn. But a couple of months later, he disappears from the island. Everyone on the island considers that he died. But he shows up in New York with newly smelted gold, roughly $250-ish million in today's dollars. And when they asked him where he got the gold, he lied. Told them a lie. They all knew it was a lie, but he wouldn't change his story. He went to England, bought a castle, wrote a memoir, but he never mentioned how he found the gold on Roatan Island. So I started looking at Roatan Island. Now, first off, it was interesting because Roatan Island, Morgan knew Roatan Island extremely well because 30 years before Panama, his uncle had conquered the island from the Spanish and turned it into a raging pirate base of pirate ships and prostitutes and merchants. And so Henry Morgan would have known the island really well. The islands were known to have caverns, both above ground and below ground, many of them treacherous, some of them reported to be haunted by evil spirits. To this day, there's local Garifuna will not go to certain of these caverns because of the hundreds of years of legends that they were haunted, not only by evil spirits, but with snakes and scorpions and spiders and bats and all kinds of other things. And then 100 years before Morgan conquered it, the Spanish had basically massacred everybody on the island and deported everyone on the island, all the indigenous populations. And when they did so, they ended a 2,000-year pilgrimage to the island without ever bothering to know why. I started thinking, I said, well, that's really interesting. What would be on this island that would be so sacred that for 2,000 years locals would canoe across 50 miles of open ocean to go visit it? And so that started me looking at, I said, well, that type of pilgrimage has to be rooted in their mythology, right? So I started analyzing their mythology of Jobaba, their mythologies of the end of the world, and I stumbled onto one, which is their creation myth. Now, in the Mayan creation myth, which is also the same as other indigenous populations in Central and South America, including the Hopis, is that the world was created and destroyed three times, and that by the time Hernandez Cortez had showed up in 1518, we were on the Maya said they were on the fourth incarnation of the world. That in the first incarnation, the world was basically made of mud people, but they were destroyed because they couldn't hold any form, and they were forgotten. In the second incarnation of the world, people were made of wood, but because they didn't praise God or worship God the right way, they were destroyed by a massive fire and then a great flood. And then in the third incarnation, creation began again, and now we were in the fourth. And after a while, I began to realize that there was a direct correlation between the Mayan multiple cycles of creation and their 5,125 year long Mayan long count, which they equated to what they called an epoch. So what the Mayans were saying is that it was their way of counting long periods of time and saying in the first epoch, their buildings were made of mud, and therefore when they deteriorated, nobody remembered them because they were forgotten. We actually find mud-made pyramids and buildings in northern South America that have deteriorated, and they look like normal mountaintops, except when they're excavated, we realize that they were man-made, made of mud. In the second creation, it struck me that there was a flood myth in it, yet one of the other 140 cultures that talk about a flood myth. But this one was different. It talked about a massive fire first. And so I started using the long count to basically go back in time and find out when this event occurred, and realized that it would coincide with the Younger Dryas asteroid event in North America, which created massive fires all over North America, left a 2 to 3 inch black matte char of charcoal all the way down through Colombia and Ecuador, all the way through North America and Central America. And the event, right at that event, also caused the oceans to rise almost overnight by at least 40, 50 feet. So then I started looking at the geology of this island. 13,000 years ago, this island was really part of the coast. When I looked at the maps and did the studies and the archaeology, I realized that this island had been a coastal wetland volcanic chain, still not an island, but still connected to land 13,000 years ago, and that the Younger asteroid event not only would have charred all of those jungles and left that black mat that we know about, but it would have flooded and basically created a flood over the civilization that existed on that island at the time. That took me to a myth called the Jobaba myth of the Mayan, that basically say that this was that their underground hell, they're basically the place where they were destroyed. It's called Jobaba. It's an underwater place of death and bones and pus and bats and scorpions and snakes. And I started saying, wow, that sounds a whole lot like what the local population says about these caves. Now, anybody who knows the early 15th, 16th century mentality of England and Spain towards the Maya mythologies, they thought they were demonic. And so Morgan, one of the things that became a hint for me is that Morgan, in one of his biographies, the biographer mentioned how hyper superstitious Morgan was. So if Morgan had found a cavern to store his stash, and that cavern had a remnant of this destroyed civilization and what others would consider ghosts or evil spirits, that would have freaked him out to no end, and basically would have prevented him from going back for what he considered to be an irretrievable treasure. And that became the baseline for the story.
I don't think those people actually believed in evil spirits. I think they were just avoiding those places because of the snakes and spiders.
Well, that would be enough to keep me away.
Yeah.
But in fact, they're actually part of the legend is that there are evil spirits. They call them dupris. There's evil dupris that haunt the caverns. And I believe that's what Mitchell Hedges discovered as well, was an entrance to those caverns before he disappeared. And it turned out that the amount of gold that he had was roughly almost equivalent to the amount of gold that Morgan had.
Are these caves a place that you could still go to today?
Most of them are flooded as the oceans have continued to rise since the 15th century. So some of the entrances are very obscure, but there are some you can go to. I would not go in without protective gear and lights and other stuff, but yeah, you can go to them. And I've had a couple of people say that they were going to, after reading the book, saying they were going to go explore the island because they had apparently one of the people who read the book had a condo on the island.
Oh, wow. That'd be
Oh,
interesting.
and one of the other clues was that there was actually an old Mayan stela on one of the outer islands that's now called Isla Barbaretta. And the stela was so weathered and worn down that they really couldn't pin what it was saying. But the archaeologist, the only note in the archaeologist report is that it appeared to be pre-Mayan. And so here's marker points that point to this pilgrimage. There's caverns that basically seem to be reflected in their mythology. The geology, the historical geology, the island seems to reflect what happened in their creation myth. And any of connections of that to a guy like Morgan would have been enough to freak him out with all of the possibilities and the images. And that was the only plausible scenario I could come up with. Because we know that the ships didn't sink because Morgan returned to Port Royal with his ship intact but empty. So the treasure went someplace. And the question that's why I started wondering, where did it go? What happened to the other 3 ships and the 600 people? Why didn't they ever return? And why would Morgan be so afraid he wouldn't go back for it or try to be too afraid to tell the world why? And I think trying to confess to the world that he was afraid of ghosts or whatever would be enough for him to say, I can't tell him that. As I said, it took me 12 years to research all this. It was a great adventure, but once I had that really fabulous backstory, I had to work hard to write an equally fabulous top story, modern adventure, whereby the reader was discovering these things in a very piece by piecemeal basis, but within a page turner format that they couldn't put down. And so that was where I had to then learn the craft of being a great author. And in doing so, I hired a really expensive developmental editor out of Simon Schuster. She now works with Amazon. And I paid her really good money to basically, and I said, I want you to go through this. I think they have the bones of a great story, but I've spent my entire career writing PowerPoints and, policy statements and technical things. And this is new for me. Well, she did. God bless her. She ripped me a new one. She gave me 44 pages of single space typewritten notes and all the things I needed to learn. I needed to read. I needed to do differently. And then handwritten notes on almost every single page of the manuscript. So it took me, after my first thought when getting it back was, oh Lord, I suck. But I took me a week to stop licking my wounds before I said, well, she did exactly what I asked her to do. This is my blueprint, and now I know what to do to keep moving this forward. And that's how I got back into it. That's how I decided. And the process was so rewarding. Although it was hard, it was also rewarding. That I think that was one of the motivations to use my retirement to use my third act career to become an author. Now, the other motivation for that came separately with my espionage artificial intelligence series. And years ago, I had been involved in implementing AI, early stage technologies, including early stage AI, with almost every job. At one point, I discovered that a program had escaped the NSA spy labs at Sandia. Not only was that true, but when I figured out how a spy program could escape the NSA and what they designed it to do that needed that stealth technology, they sent 2 FBI agents to my door. Now, they were really upset that I had figured out something they thought was supposed to be top secret. I was giddy. I was snarky. I was giddy. I was excited. To me, I had spent a year trying to solve this mystery of what it meant for a program to escape, and they wouldn't be there if I had gotten it wrong. And I was telling them so. I was like, yes, 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 I did it. I figured it out. Oh man, this is so cool. Oh, come on, boys, you wouldn't be here if I was wrong. I can't wait to tell all my friends. Hey, my wife is going to come home soon. Will you wait to see her? Oh, hey, let me see your badges again. They looked at each other. They weren't expecting that kind of reaction. I got the "we are not amused" speech. And then my wife came home and pulls me aside and says, honey, there's 2 FBI agents in our dining room. I'm pretty sure it's not a social call. What did you do? So at that point in time, I knew it changed. It pivoted something in my head where I had been working my career to develop technologies and implement technologies into the enterprise to make businesses run better or to make better products. It was the first time I really started getting my head around the idea of, well, what if I was James Bond Q? What would I be doing with these technologies if I were Q? And wouldn't I assume that my own government is doing that? If I could figure out how to do that and what to do, they got to be doing it. And so it started me really investigating AI in terms of weapon systems and espionage and cyber technologies and cybersecurity, deep fake videos, and long before anyone else was aware of it. So my first book, Swarm, which is based on that real event of a program escaping and my speculative nature of what it did afterwards, was released in 2020 and predicted many of the things people are now just becoming aware of with AI with regard to deep fake, superintelligence, interconnectivity, espionage, viral systems, etc. So yeah, that was the other reason I wanted to write, is I wanted to write about that particular topic and how it's going to change the world faster than people are expecting, in some ways, not in ways that are going to be, it's going to be amazingly good in some ways. In other ways, it's going to be amazingly bad.
Yeah, just within the past year or so, it seems like there's been a really big increase in AI related stuff. There's a lot of issues going on with like AI and art right now.
And I think those are actually some of the good things where we'll iron out some of the copyright and creative rights issues through courts. I think primarily. I think you're going to see, I think the courts will move faster than the Congress will in terms of resolving that from a legal perspective. But I think you're already seeing a number of court cases. The LA Times or the New York Times suing OpenAI for absorbing their information without permission. Kelly Carlin, who's the daughter of George Carlin, is suing a guy who created a George Carlin deepfake video about George Carlin or making him say things he didn't say. And so she's suing him. So you're going to see there's a number of different suits that are going to start happening around the creative space. And then you're going to see, just like we saw the Actors Guild and Writers Guild last year, stand up against the use of AI in creative copyright materials for entertainment, where it has to be labeled and people get to know that, there's a human element involved and not confusing the two. Where I see some of the greater dangers are in the realm of espionage, hacking tools, criminal tools. So, for example, the same GPT-4 platform that created the OpenAI that we're now using, ChatGPT, also spawned malicious software tools such as Evil GPT, Fraud GPT, Worm GPT, Darkbird, and several others. There's sophisticated hacking tools now called Predator and Pegasus that can hack somebody's phone with a zero-click response and gain 100% access to almost any phone on the planet. And so the question becomes, is as we develop these incredibly powerful technologies, are we prepared with the regulations, the tools, the resources to prevent criminals, crime lords, drug lords, despots, dictators, corrupt politicians, corrupt CEOs, or sociopathic billionaires, and we can all name at least one, to use these tools in ways that are malicious towards society. And the answer is we're not ready yet. The secondary question becomes the speed of growth. Right now, the current GPT-4 has an IQ of roughly 155. That's 5 points less than Einstein, smarter than 99% of the people on the planet, and is growing at such a rate that the GPT-5 platform could have an IQ of 1,000 or higher by 2024. That's 5 times or 3 times smarter than any human has ever existed. Now, at this point, we're okay because AI is still largely procedural. It hasn't reached the threshold of consciousness or self-awareness yet. But there are a number of companies around the world actively working on that. OpenAI is working on the Q algorithms, which basically embed the ability to do rational reasoning, problem solving using higher mathematics, as opposed to just language. There are a number of companies who are trying to combine AI with quantum computing or a form of computing called neuromorphic computing, which is 1,000 times faster than standard computing in terms of processing, to bridge that gap between superintelligence and conscious entity. Now, the truth is, we really don't know how a superintelligence would react to humanity, but we know that AI learned from patterns. So our patterns, if the AI is smart enough to look at the patterns of average humans, what are they going to find? Wow, they're going to find some really bad habits.
Yeah.
They're going to find some self-destructive tendencies. They're going to find people who talk about honesty and then they turn around and lie. People who talk about peace, but we make weapons of war. People who talk about the justice, but we realize that it's really one-sided and very disruptive, distorted, and biased. And so we look when we look at how AI is learning and what we're teaching it and how we're teaching it, we're not teaching it the emotional EQ or the ethics or the moralities that it's taken humanity 1,000,000 years of evolution to understand how to build and maintain society and community. And so there's a danger as these products are becoming intelligent, if there's a possibility for them to become self-aware, what kind of intelligence will that be? And the honest answer is we don't know. There's a CEO of a company called Stability AI that makes education software, and he likes to refer to this phenomenon as the black hole. He says when we go over the event horizon of a black hole, it becomes a quantum event where anything is possible, and we have no idea what happens at that point. And he says the event horizon of our artificial intelligence is, in his mind, only 3 years away. And so part of my goal, and then we started adding it into weapon systems, and we started adding into fraud systems and banking systems to control it, and job issues. So the International Monetary Fund predicts that 40% of the global jobs could be displaced by AI by 2030. Well, that's going to create an economic cascading effect to government deficits. And while at the same time, when people are being evicted, we're going to see higher homelessness, higher joblessness, prices are going to go up. So we're creating a potential economic crisis. And we don't know how an AI will really solve some of those things. So there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of positive, great, creative things. I love the creative tools of AI. I don't use AI to write my books, but I use them to do research and postulate ideas. But I do my own writing. But there's a new version of OpenAI that they're announcing, a new, almost hyper-realistic video capability that'll come out in 2024 that will make deepfakes almost indistinguishable from real video. So there's creative potential. We're going to see new medicines. We're going to see new medical techniques. We'll see new, more accurate types of climate models. We'll see logistics problems that could take supercomputers years to solved in minutes. We'll see new materials that'll help us do things cheaper and faster. There's no end to the potential positive things that AI can help us do. The question I have is that who's going to profit and who's going to pay? And are they going to, no company that I'm aware of is building AI strictly for humanitarian purposes. There's $200 billion right now of investments into AI technologies. Every single one of those investors wants a rate of return. And that's going to be driving how AI will be used, both within government and within industry and commerce over the next 3 to 5 years.
AI it's like the ultimate double-edged sword. There's so much potential for good, but on the flip side, who knows what some people might do with it. I mean,
Exactly.
could you foresee a future similar to that in like the Terminator movies where the machines take over?
I would hope that we would get wise before that happens, that we would wake up and put in some level of international nuclear treaty level of controls before we allow that to happen. But it's a possibility. Now, I think that the particular scenario of Terminator, which is the AI takes over the satellite system and takes over the war systems, I think we're still a few years away from. I think it's going to be the real challenge is getting through the dystopic short-term period of the next 10 years to decide if the technology and humanity is going to be around long enough to really get to that stage. I think there's more danger right now in the conflicts of Russia, China, and the Middle East, especially given our potential state of politics here in the U.S. So, and the fragile state of NATO and our relationship with NATO. So I think that it can contribute to some of those things becoming hotspots and getting out of control. So, for example, 2 years ago, I think it was 3 years ago, maybe, the RAND Corporation wrote a report to the DoD. And within that report, they listed the 10 top security risks for the nation. One of those security risks wasn't AI specific, although there was one that was in AI cryptology and re-encrypting our networks with a higher level of quantum cryptology. But the other one that they listed as a top 10 security risk was what they call AI data poisoning. So imagine if an enemy could somehow come in and find all of the massive amounts of data that we use to run the AI on and start intentionally inserting bad poisonous data. With the black box way that AI works in general, along with this bad data, it could cause a malfunction. That malfunction could cause, for example, we're now using AI to help manage some of the nuclear processing on board submarines. It could cause an accident. That bad data could cause our defense system to think that a missile had been launched when it hadn't, and maybe we launch a response before we figured out the error. So the AI data poisoning, which is an AI-related risk, but still tied to the malicious human activity element. So I tell people AI is neither benign or evil in and of itself. It's a machine. It has intelligence. It's going to have goals. It's going to have objectives. As it becomes conscious of itself, we don't fully know what those goals and objectives are going to be, and we can't assume, even according to Bill Gates, that they will align to our own values. So we still have a chance to put guardrails on some of these things, but only if we act urgently. Now, the EU has already passed the first of what I hope to be a series of AI laws called the AI Act that limits some of the more commercially oriented problems, things like rights use, using people's content, using their images, biases towards people of color, commercial types of risks in use that they can see. We haven't, and the U.S. is basically still dragging our feet, and we're not yet willing to address or able to address the larger, more existential issues of superintelligence, consciousness, weapons development, espionage use. So we've still got some major risks ahead. And I tell people it's not the technology itself, it's the nature of humans and how we use the technology that we need to be afraid of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just curious, did anything ever come from your visit with the FBI? Like, did you get in any trouble for that?
Oh, they tap my. Still know that they watch over me. I'm on the watch list still for sure because of what I write about. But at the time, I was laughing at him. I said, "What are you guys going to do?" I didn't hack anything. I didn't steal anything. I got the idea from what happened through a little Associated Press article that was very. All it said was that a program had escaped the Lawrence Livermore laboratories at Sandia, and if I knew something, to contact this professor or that FBI agent. Nothing else ever published. I happen to just be geek enough to take that little blurb and ask enough hard questions and go after to find the answers to resolve it. Not something they probably anticipated happening, but I didn't steal anything or hack anything. And I said, "What are you going to do? Bust me for being a smarty pants?" I said, "If you guys are really freaked out, give me a job, you know?" But they wanted, at the time, I had produced a webisode series that was almost a predecessor to the book series. It featured this program as a character called Sylvia and was speculating what it was doing now and how it might work and what it would work if an underground group had it and all this kind of other stuff. They wanted me to take the site down. Well, I had been optioned. The site had been optioned. It was a huge hit. We got like 10 or 20 awards. It was crashed the server. Some of my biggest fans were major guys up in NASA, like guys with aliases like Orbit at NASA.gov, who was the director of flight operations for the Houston Space Center. So we were really popular, and they had optioned the show. And I said, "Well, no, this is people are really responding to this. This is a real story." I said, "Don't blame me that you guys, let some geek, some little slip out, and I figured it out." And what they did is they went to the studio and killed the deal. So I wound up losing some money. I had to tuck my tail between my legs. I couldn't keep producing this forever. And I went out and I got a real job. It was either at a startup or Oracle at the time. I think it might have been a startup. But yeah, they couldn't really do anything. And I could tell they were tapping my phones for a long time when we had landlines. And I've noticed their software on my computers every once in a while. But I don't really give a crap because I'm not breaking any laws. If they want to bust me for being a smarty pants, they should have done it.
Am I on the watch list now too because I'm talking to you?
Probably.
Hey, that's fine. I'll take the extra downloads for my podcast.
That's the way it works. Well, it could be as bad as the Chinese system. So, the Chinese has a citizen control system, and you get a score. And if you actually get a call from somebody on your phone with somebody with a lower score than you, your phone will tell you they have a lower score than you. And if you choose to answer the phone, it could lower your score. So we haven't gotten to that place yet. So hallelujah.
Hopefully we never do, but who knows? Guy, what else would you like to accomplish in life? I mean, you've already done so much.
Well, I would love to turn these books into movies. They would make great. Imagine, James Bond meets Indiana Jones with the savvy of Elon Musk and the snarky attitude of Robin Williams. I think they would make great movies. I think it would be great stories. And I'm hoping to continue to educate people on some of the themes behind the movies, including some of the more spiritual and religious themes and prophetic themes and things of that nature. I'm working on the third book in this Snow Chronicles, the Spy series now. That'll deal with pretty heady issues that deal with CERN experiments to create black holes in order to prove fifth dimensions and how fifth dimensions could be connected to both UAPs and spiritual issues. And, we almost want to call it the God dimension, how that's going to could impact the 2024 election, Ukraine, Gaza. I mean, we've got some pretty heavy issues. As our superintelligence starts to evolve, it asks questions of what's intelligence itself. Does a superintelligence same as our intelligence? And if a human can have a near-death experience, does a superintelligence still have an entity, still have a consciousness once the power's turned off? And so we'll be dealing with some of these larger issues of what happens when the computers start to become smarter than we are and we start losing control. What does that mean? So we're dealing with some pretty heavy issues, but I'm trying to do it in a good way where it doesn't get too dystopic, where the characters keep it light, but you're being provoked to really kind of think through some substantive questions.
Earlier, you had mentioned that there was that cartel thug that tried to intimidate you, and you ended up writing him into your book. Are there any other instances of events in your book that were inspired by your real life?
Oh, well, besides discovering the AI that escaped and the cartel thug that tried to kill me, there's a lot of the smaller things in my books that, for example, I needed a really positive, uplifting, funny experience in The Curse of Cortes. I wanted to end it in a real uplifting way after I'd taken the characters through this horrific ordeal. And I pulled that from a real life experience that was absolutely hilarious. And even people at the time said that I should make a movie out of that scene that occurred between my wife and I. So that got to get filtered in there. Several of the characters in my books are based on people that I've known throughout the years, including places like Amsterdam and India and Latin America and LA, and even some of the men and women I worked with in the government when I was doing consulting for Microsoft. So I pull a lot from various different experiences. Some of my characters, especially in the male character of Derek Taylor in the Spy series, pull from some of my traumas as a child. I won't talk about my I couldn't go through and write a memoir of my childhood without getting triggered, but somehow I can project some of those things through another character's eyes and experiences and somehow kind of filter that through. So yeah, I tend to build in a lot. I've been more fortunate than I deserve to go from sleeping under overpasses to flying corporate jets, eating stolen food to eating at five-star restaurants. I've seen politics at its worst. I was in the boardroom on a day when I saw an oil company basically kill climate research of their own group that they had developed themselves, and the volatile nature that they wanted to kill it. And so I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to become a writer is I had a lot of experiences that I felt I could filter through the characters and filter through the deeply researched, highly plausible, factually based scenarios that I'm trying to, that are speculative, and I admit that they're speculative, but those things that could happen that maybe haven't happened yet.
Other than the books and the music, what else do you like to do? What makes you happy?
Well, I love to travel. I just got back from a 2-week trip to Italy. That was amazing. I love finding new cultures, new languages, new foods, new art, new histories and mythologies, mysteries. I always want to know, what's the greatest mystery of your culture, and I like solving those things. I still do a little bit of music for pleasure. I still love to research. If I ever get a chance to get back to Southern California, I'd love to get another sailboat and go on more adventures. I'm probably a little too old to go diving again. I'd probably be a little bit, more shark bait this time. But yeah, and it's and time with friends. We have a lot of really great neighbors and friends. We like to enjoy dinners with friends and deep discussions and keeping it connected.
Okay, very cool. Guy, this hour has flown by. I've got one final question for you here. If I gave you a time machine, would you be willing to travel back to the days of Henry Morgan to see what he was really up to?
Oh, heck no. Um, it, you know, we romance about the Middle Ages and the days of piracy, but the reality of that life was pretty brutal and pretty unhygienic and bad food, bad facilities. I'm perfectly happy in my end of the world, modern that lifestyle with my comfort home and my internet feeds and my 36-inch monitors. I like doing the research and asking the questions and coming up with the answers. But if I had to go back and to a time when people were tortured the way they were just for money and no justice at all, that really isn't, the reality of it isn't as pleasant as we like to make it.
I would agree with you on that. Guy, the website is guymorrisbooks.com.
Correct.
Any other places where people can find you online?
Well, I'm on Amazon, Barnes & Noble online. If you go to Drafted Digital, there's about 10 other sites that I'm distributed on with as ebooks. If you like audibles, both Swarm and The Last Ark which is the sequel to Swarm that we didn't get a chance to talk about, but it's fascinating as well, are both on Audible. And the narrator is a great, really exceptional television actor named Brian Cheney. So if you like Audibles, those are on Audible.
Do you do social media at all?
I'm on Facebook. If you go to Official Guy Morris Books. On Twitter, I'm Guy Morris Books. I think I'm Instagram. I'm Author Guy Morris, and then I'm also in LinkedIn. So if you look around, you can find me.
Awesome. Well, Guy, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a great time.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you. And thank you to all you for listening today. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube to search for A Happy Moment. And I will see you guys next time. Take care.